Okay, we are live, and this is the Bible Thumping Wingnut Hangout on YouTube channel. And with me is Matt Slick and Jonathan Bradford to start out with. Matt Slick is the president and founder of carm.org, and he has a daily radio program, and you can hear his radio program not only in his local area but on iTunes and, of course, from his website, carm.org. And this is the third time he's been here on my channel. It's been a blessing, and we're going to, just like in the previous weeks, I'm going to put the link to join to ask a question, to interact with Matt. I'm going to put it in the feed, in the comment section. And until we get some other people in here, I have a question for you, Matt, that was given to me from a fellow Christian. And they have this question about Psalm chapter 51, where David is showing remorse for his sin. And this questioner is asking, why did David say, "Against you and you alone have I sinned," when obviously he had, from our perspective, he had wronged many people?
Yeah, it's always been a question, an issue I've always wondered about. I've thought about it many times over the years. Against you and you only have I sinned. And the only thing I could come up with is that it's God's law that reveals what sin is. And ultimately we're breaking the law of God. Now, Jesus says in John, maybe it is Matthew 12:34, out of the abundance of the heart the mouth speaks. I think that's where he said that. And when God said, "Let there be light," he's speaking out of the character of his heart and his creative effort. And when he gave us the law, don't lie, don't steal, etc., that is a reflection of his character. So the law is a reflection of the character of God, the one imperfect one. And so that law, that reflection of the character of God, the codification of that, I would think is the universal standard by which all things are judged. So if there is no God, there can be no sin. If God does not exist, there can be no sin, because sin is breaking God's law, 1 John 3:4. And so without God being there, again, no sin. So David ultimately is breaking the law of God in all of his sin, his murders and his everything he did. And so he'd be sinning against God alone in that sense. And I think that what's going on there is what he's doing is reflecting on the issue of God is the supreme king, God is the supreme Lord, God alone is the one who authored his law and revealed it to us. And so when we sin, we're just breaking his law. Now when he says don't lie to someone else, and we do that, we've sinned against that individual, but it's based on God's law. So ultimately, I think that what he's talking about is we're just breaking the law of God, and that's what sin is measured by. So hence, against you and you only have I sinned. I think that's the answer I came up with. I don't know if it's right or not. That's what I think. All right. Okay.
I was sending the link around. Now, you said that I'm sending the link, posting it on Facebook, and I'm going to tweet it out in a moment here. So
I can do that too. I can put it out there right now if you want, on several things.
Sure. Let me give you the link to watch. Okay.
All right.
As soon as I can find my cursor. Where did it go? Well, let me ask you this question as I
All right.
search for that link. You said if there is no God, then there is no sin, and I've made the argument multiple times that the problem of evil isn't really a problem of evil. It actually is an evidence that God exists. Is that an argument you would make with that, or?
Well, yeah. Whenever atheists say that Christians have a problem of evil, I say, no, we don't. You do. We can account for what evil is. You can't. You have to borrow from the Christian worldview in order to talk about evil. You have to say that something is bad. Well, you don't know if something's bad or not intrinsically or naturally. You just say, hey, this is bad. Why? Because you deem it so, and because people vote that it is so. It doesn't make any sense. So evil is not a problem for the Christian, except experiencing it. In that sense, it's a problem. But explanatorily speaking, it's not a problem. God allows it to occur, and it is that which is contrary to the mind and the will of God, but He allows it to occur in the world. So we can account for it. But the atheist can't. All the atheist can really say is, well, that's unpleasant, people don't like it. And then they call that evil. Well, all right, they can call it whatever they want, but it doesn't make it so in the ontological sense. It's just an issue of inconvenience and harm and discomfort and things like that. That's all they got. They're the ones with the problem of evil.
Right. It's, before I heard of presuppositional apologetics, I always used, not knowingly, the presuppositional argument for morality. And, if there is no God, all you have is your opinion, and it can't be right. It cannot be correct when you compare it to the opposite opinion. It's just different.
Right. That's exactly correct. One of the things excuse me, I'll talk to the atheist and I'll say, look, because they're a good group of people to run things by and hear ultimately quick, illogical responses and answers and explanations of things. Excuse me, but when they want to talk about morality, I'll say, you can be ethical, you can certainly have morals, but you can't justify your morals as being anything other than subjective preferences. You don't have the right to be able to say that something is right or is wrong. And so, I have a famous sentence that I use. It is always wrong for everyone to torture babies to death merely for their personal pleasure. And the atheists will agree that that's the case. Well, they're agreeing to a universal norm, but they're also agreeing that there is an intrinsically evil property to the action itself. And how is that possible in an atheist worldview? They can't justify evil. They can't justify objectively and universally that any of their declarations about right or wrong really are right or wrong. All they can do is say, we believe this is what we call wrong. We're going to define wrong as that which, and then they put something in the blank. Well, normally what they do is that which unnecessarily harms somebody. Well, why is that the standard? It's kind of a teleological argument in the sense that the goal now becomes the means by which we justify the means. But it's a little bit tautologous in the sense. We're going to define the goal, by what we want it to be right now, and because it reaches the goal, everything's fine. It's kind of circular. So they can't say, well, wait a minute, there isn't an objective standard. They can't. So when I talk to atheists and I ask them a question about morality, or maybe they'll raise up the issue of God's actions in the Bible and they'll say that's immoral, I'll say, well, that's your opinion. And besides that, what justifies your opinion as being right? And if you think your opinion's right, well, then why is it that you want to shove it down everybody else's throat? Who are you? The best you've got is just, well, I think it's wrong from my personal preference and experience. And I'll defend their right to have that opinion. But at that point, they don't have any right to say anybody else is right or wrong. They only have the opinion to say, well, I believe somebody else is right or wrong. Well, okay, you can believe it is right or wrong, but you do not have the right to impose your belief on anybody else. What they do is they often complain that the Christians in America are trying to impose their beliefs on everybody else through legislations, laws, oppression, whatever it is. And then they complain. They say that is intrinsically wrong, which it isn't in an atheist worldview. They may not like it, but they'll complain about it. But then they'll say, that's wrong for you to do that. But we can, as atheists, what we can do is tell you what is right or wrong for God to do and what's right and wrong for other people to do. But you can't tell us what's right and wrong. We'll tell you. They actually play the game of trying to become God. It's like wheel of philosophy, wheel of deity. Spin it. The atheist, the self-God, like, yeah, everybody, I get to play God, and I get to be the one who decides what's morally right and wrong and impose it on everybody else. Yay, wheel of idiocy, or wheel of atheism, I should say. And maybe I'll make up a game, wheel of atheism. It all has blank spots. There's nothing there. I don't have anything to offer.
Now, I'll play the. I'm hearing feedback from somebody. I'm not sure who that is. Is that you, Jonathan? Yeah, it must have been you. I'll play the part of the non-believer. Matt, because of evolution, species are striving to survive, and the humans who have morality tend to survive because we get along with each other. So my morality as a non-believer is a product of the evolutionary process, and those that aren't moral, they don't last because they killed each other off.
I say, yeah, so.
So I don't need God for my morality. It's a
Okay,
product of evolution.
that's a product of evolution. Okay, that's how you define it, then you win.
I defeated Matt Slick. Yes.
This is a good example of something. Is they'll argue like that, and I'll say, well, if you define it that way, then you win. And I stop. I want to see if they're getting the problem with what they're saying. And then they'll often do what you just said. They will say, oh, we win. Matt Slick couldn't answer. They don't realize that they don't understand what the real issue is. If you define something a certain way and then declare that that's what the definition is, and then you apply the definition to a certain situation, well, of course you're going to win by default. You're going to win by definitional default. But it doesn't mean that you're right. And so what I often do is to see where the atheists are. If intellectually they understand the issues, because it's a test for me to see, are they being logical, or are they presupposing something they don't realize the mistakes that they're making in their judgments. And then I'll point it out to them and say, wait a minute, what you did was beg the question. You assume certain things are true. And if you were to say that this is what is right, or survivability is what is moral, then there is no survivability issue with morality. It's just an issue of what you want to define morality as. You define it as that kind of conduct that aids in survivability. Well, if that's what you do, then that's what moral is. What justifies your definition as being right. That's the ultimate. What the atheists want to do is pontificate. They want to say that there are certain things, and this is what these certain things mean and will be. Why? Because that's what they want. Well, what justifies them as being right? And this is where atheism and a lot of critics just fall flat on their face. They don't realize that what they're doing is making assumptions about various things, and they're not able to account for the validity of their assumptions. They're not able to demonstrate that their assumptions are valid to begin with. So what they often will do is commit fallacy of circular reasoning. And this is a good example. What you posited is that morality is what aids survivability. In other words, morality is now defined as behavior that aids survivability. Since we've survived, therefore morality is evolutionarily based. But wait a minute, you're just defining it based on evolutionary principles. Define it based on evolutionary principles, then of course it's going to work. Because you, in a very limited sense, within a limited circle. But who says that the definition is the right one to begin with? Who says that that's one that is proper? How do you know that evolution is true to begin with? How do you know that mechanistic systems can produce moral obligation? It's a deontological issue, and they really can't deal with those too well. Anyway, I could ramble on more about it, but that's it.
They would say because, well, one of the things they would say is that it seems to be working.
That's pragmatism. If it works, therefore it's true. So pragmatism just says, yeah, it works, so therefore it's true. Again, it's tautologous. It's begging the question. Morality is defined as that which aids in survivability. We're surviving, therefore it works, so therefore the definition works and is true. It's completely circular.
I'm going to try to add Benny to this. Let's see if I can get him in here. He wants to talk about morality or a different subject. This is, I think you interacted with him before. I added you to the broadcast, Benny.
Hello, how are you?
How you doing? How you doing tonight?
I'm all right. Yeah, I heard you talking about morality, so if you, yeah, it's an interesting subject. I wonder. He talked about how we're begging the question by just sort of rigging a definition that serves us best, I think. And I'm wondering how he's not doing the same thing. I talked to him a couple weeks ago, and he said, I asked him about the goodness of God, and he said, God is good by definition. It's a problem I've been having with pretty much any of the Christians I've been talking to, is that all of God's attributes are just stipulated. And your definition of goodness is stipulated. Your definition of holiness is stipulated. So it's all just, he's doing exactly what he just said. He's just coming up with a definition that makes the most sense for his position, and rejecting anything else. So
you're an atheist, right, and an evolutionist?
Well, I mean, I accept evolution if that's what an evolutionist is.
Are you an atheist?
Yeah.
Okay. So when I talk about the problem with atheistic morality, and then atheists in an evolutionary setup want to define morality, then of course they're going to win by definition. Would you agree with me so far?
Well, I suppose, but how would you suggest that we come up with a definition? I mean, we have to come up with some working definition, right?
What I would do if I were you is go to see what God says about what is right or wrong, since He's the ultimate source of right and wrong.
We don't have God. We just have a book.
No, you have God.
We have
you
a book.
Reject God.
I reject the book.
No, you reject God.
God's not the Bible.
I didn't say God was the Bible. You reject God.
Well, how would I don't have God. I have a book.
No, you reject God.
How am I rejecting God?
You deny Him.
I just don't believe there is such a thing. It's not
there
the
you
same
go.
Well, I could be wrong, but it's just my best guess based on the evidence.
What evidence?
Based on the lack of evidence.
Lack of evidence means there is no God?
Lack of evidence for a supernatural being that's watching over the earth and created everything and judges us when we, do the wrong stuff. And yeah, I don't see that there's evidence for that.
Do the wrong stuff, which is getting back to where we're beginning with, but now I'm intrigued. So what evidence would be sufficient for you?
That's a good question. I'm not sure, but I don't think anything written in a 2,000-year-old book would satisfy. I mean,
I didn't ask what wouldn't. What would?
I guess if I had some kind of personal experience that, people joke about, like if the stars aligned. I mean, I think Lawrence Krauss joked and said, if the stars lined up and said, I am here. But
did you say joke?
I think he was telling a joke. I mean, in a debate, he said, if the stars lined up in such a way that said, I'm Yahweh and I'm real, that would be pretty persuasive. But
would you believe if that were to happen? Would you believe that?
It would. I would have to take it much more seriously. I mean, I suppose it could be some kind of a special effect trick. Somebody could maybe use lasers or something. But
okay, so the evidence wouldn't be convincing, would it?
I'm not sure. It's not an easy question. I mean,
yes, it is. It's an easy question. You gave me something, and you cited something, and I'm asking if it would work, and you're telling me it wouldn't work.
I'm not sure. That's the thing. It's really not an easy question. I mean, if I was to say to you, what kind of evidence would prove to you that Shiva is real? It's not easy.
Well, I would need to see some consistency philosophically to do that. I would need to know if there's any historical evidence or intervention, supposedly, of such a being into the physical realm. Because something that's not detectable in any way wouldn't make any sense at all. Now, atheism can't work because, well, it doesn't have the explanatory power in some very critical areas, where Christianity does.
Atheism is just
any God that you want to go with.
Sorry, go
What's
ahead.
that?
You cut out for a second. I thought there was a gap, but it was just
That's all right.
probably okay.
What were you going to say about atheism?
Well, atheism doesn't need to have explanatory power. It's not it's just a simple non-belief in this one explanation. It's a rejection of an explanation that is not found to be plausible. That doesn't mean
you reject God.
I reject an explanation that I don't find to be plausible. It's not God. There is no God for me to reject. There's people talking. I'm rejecting their explanations. So that's different than rejecting God. I'm rejecting what they're saying about God.
No, you're rejecting God.
I don't have a God to reject. I have only people.
You don't.
No, who am I talking to right now? I'm talking to Matt Slick.
Yeah.
You're who I can reject. I can't reject God because there's no God.
There is no God? How do you know there's no God?
I'm seeing no evidence of a God.
And so you see no evidence, so therefore God doesn't exist. Don't you think that's kind of arrogant and narrow-minded?
It's not a proof. I didn't say it was a
wow.
proof.
Okay, look, Benny, you say, I see no evidence, so there's no God.
I didn't say that.
You just said it.
I said I see no evidence, and that's the reason I've concluded there is most likely no God. It's not an absolute. Okay. It's not an absolute in the same sense that I can't know for sure that Shiva doesn't exist. But am I compelled to prove that Shiva doesn't exist? How could I?
What kind of evidence do you think an infinite supreme being should or ought to demonstrate to you personally to convince you that he exists?
That's a really good question. And if I'm going to be held responsible and sent to hell to burn forever, then it better be pretty persuasive. Because
so God better do what you say.
If he's loving, I mean, I entered because you were talking about morality. If you're going to say that God loves us, then if he's also going to judge us based on our beliefs, then he needs to provide some kind of persuasive evidence that, I mean, if he's going to judge us simply for the act of believing that he's real and following what was written about him 2,000 years ago, then he needs to, it should be, if he's going to treat us fairly.
So you have a criteria.
There should be something pretty.
So there is
a
criteria you have. It's not evidential, is it? It's philosophical.
Well, yeah, of course. I don't know. It could be both, couldn't it?
You just gave me a philosophical reason. God ought to reveal himself in such a way, because if he's loving, he ought to do this. You're appealing to logic, you're appealing to morality, which all you have is a subjective opinion about what is right and wrong, and what God ought to do. All you're doing is arguing from within your mini atheistic circle. You're not going to get anywhere that way. You're saying God ought to do this. Really? Why ought he to? And why ought that be the right standard? Don't you see the problem of God?
Based on any definition of love, I mean, if this
Who says God's love?
Every Christian I've ever met.
Well, where do they get that from?
I thought it was from the Bible. I think there's a section that says God is love. That probably is verbatim.
1 John 4:8. So okay. then you trust what the Bible says about God being love.
No, I'm saying this is Christians telling me what they believe. So I mean, if their God is as
that's irrelevant.
No, it is completely relevant. If the God is the way that you're advertising him, the way that he's sold in the Bible, then if he's love, then he ought to not torture people without giving them every opportunity to not be tortured. So, I mean, this is just based on a conventional definition of love. If you don't think, if you think it's loving,
whose conventional definition are you talking about?
Any reasonable human being.
Reasonable? Were you Kantian?
Is loving torture?
Are you Kantian?
Is it loving to torture someone?
Okay. What about justice?
I don't think torture can ever be just, especially not infinite torture.
Okay. So what do you do with the Bible verse that says God hates people? Psalm 5:5, Psalm 11:5, he hates those who do iniquity.
So God is love and hate.
Yeah. Should he judge that? It doesn't say he is hate. It says he is love, but it says
he is love, but he also hates.
Yes.
What does it mean for God to be love while hating?
I don't know what it means to be love. That's something he reveals to us in the communicable attributes of God and his nature revealed to us. We imperfectly reflect them.
Do you know another reason why people reject the God concept? Like I said, not rejecting God, but rejecting the God concept, is that many people reject it as incoherent. An incoherent concept like a God who is love while hating.
Whoa, dude! Yeah. Are you a dad? Are you a father?
No.
Okay. You really ought not to judge God out of ignorance. I'm not trying to be mean, honestly, I'm not. But what you do, and what a lot of atheists do, what you're doing is the same as so many of them, is that you will judge God out of an ignorance. And I mean this doesn't sound like I'm trying to be respectful, but I really am. I'm not trying to be condescending, and it may sound like it, but I'm really not trying to be. It's just that what you'll do is you'll say God is this and he can't be that, so therefore, according to what I understand, God has to be this way. I think that's kind of a problematic thing. I think what we can do is look at that. See, I'm a father, and I can hate the actions that my children do and also love them at the same time. I can have a mixture of emotions simultaneously that I have to sort through. I'm imperfect. But God certainly does hate those who do iniquity, as Psalm 5:5 and Psalm 11 clearly states. But he also has a nature of love, and out of that nature of love, he provided a way to redeem people from the righteous judgment that's coming upon them for the rejection of him. It's coming.
All I said was that I'm not rejecting God once again. I'm rejecting the God concept. And the concept, to me, is wacky when you start saying he is love and he hates it. And whatever happened to hate the sin, love the sinner? You're saying God hates the people. Why
Where's
not?
that in the Bible?
I don't know. Why do Christians say it all the time?
Well, not in there.
There's nothing in there that would give you the suggestion that he hates sin.
That statement is not there. But what I believe what you want to do is you want to restrict God to a certain pattern of your expectations so that you can justify rejecting him.
It's not really that. It's just that
Yes, it is.
if you're going to worship this being, if you're going to call this being good, then you need to justify that with something. You're not.
I don't need to justify God.
Of course, you need to justify your concept of God, because your
I don't need to
concept of
justify God at all.
you need to justify your concept of God, because many people have contradictory concepts. Your concept is not the same as
It's justified in the Scripture.
it's kind of not. I mean, your concept is different than the Catholic concept. It's different than it's different than the
Hold on. Do you know the Catholic concept and the Protestant concept of God?
I know that their concepts of grace are different. I know that their concepts of
The concept of grace is different, but not the concept of God. So you're wrong.
a God with a different standard of grace is a different God. Yeah. God is defined by his attributes. We don't have a God. We have a list of attributes. The way that God is described and defined by Christians is by listing off attributes. So if you start changing attributes around, you've got a different concept. You've got a different God.
Do you think just possibly people perceive those attributes differently?
I think many people disagree about everything about this because it's left
I
so
asked
vague.
if you believe that people actually perceive these attributes differently. The answer, of course, is yes.
Well,
We
people
go to the
disagree about
Scriptures,
everything.
that's a revelation of God to us. People can certainly perceive it. You brought up the issue of the Catholics and the Protestants and the different view of God.
Mhm.
I talked about that very quickly, then you changed it to the attributes of God.
No, I'm saying that
We have the same view.
the God that I'm trying to wrap my head around is described and defined by his attributes. The only God we have, the only God we know, is given to us as a list of attributes. He's timeless, spaceless, immaterial, all-powerful, all-knowing, all-loving. Usually they say all-loving. You wouldn't.
They shouldn't correct them when they say that. He's not all loving, all powerful, all this, all that. The Bible doesn't say that.
Okay, well, you've got a disagreement with most of the Christians
I
online.
don't care. The Bible doesn't say that. The Christians very often misrepresent God in their ignorance as well.
Well, Matt, I know you know the Bible very well. I mean, you have probably the most encyclopedic knowledge of the Scripture of anyone I've met. But you also claim to have a sort of an absolute standard, but other Christians who have a different concept of God also claim that absolute standard. So how does a non-believer, how does someone outside of your Christian tradition know who to believe?
Go to the Bible.
The Bible can be interpreted any way. That's why there are all of these disagreements.
Anyway.
It can be interpreted 1,000 different ways. That's why there are so many denominations of Christians. So, I mean, telling somebody to go to the Bible is not a simple thing to decipher.
Well, you know what? I'm glad you agree with me.
I probably disagree. I agree with you about something. What do I disagree?
Oh, great. I'm glad. Oh, see, there you go again. I thank you very much for telling me that I am correct and that you don't know what you're talking about. I appreciate that.
Is this some kind of a slickism joke?
See, there you go again. You admit so clearly that I'm right and you're wrong.
What's your point?
You said the Bible can be interpreted any way. Any way. I'm just applying that to you. Anything you say can be interpreted any way. I'm interpreting it to mean that I'm right and you're wrong.
Okay. So what I'm trying to say, anyway, is a bit of an exaggeration, but I think you know what I meant. Is that
no, I don't know what you mean. I don't know what you are trying to say.
I think
now, I do believe that you're rejecting God because of Scripture.
I'm rejecting the concept.
Right, look in the text. Right there, John 11:35, Jesus wept. The context is Jesus' friend, Lazarus, had died, and Jesus went to go find him. And he found that he had died, and then Jesus wept. What do you think it means, Jesus wept? That's the shortest verse in the entire Bible. What do you think it means? How would you interpret that?
Hopefully it means that Jesus wept.
There you go. I would agree with you. When you want to hide behind this vague gray cloud, the Bible can be interpreted any way you want. Really? Who said so? You?
Well, verses like, if you confess your sins, he's faithful and just to forgive you your sins and cleanse you from all unrighteousness. Is interpreted very differently by you than by Arminians. So this is just...
Whoa. I go to an Arminian church. We interpret it the same.
Well, what I was taught, because I was raised Christian, what I was taught was that you had to repent, and this was an act of your own volition. It was your own choice. It wasn't predestined. It wasn't, God hadn't elected certain people and damned others from before they were born. So this is a different way of viewing a concept like salvation,
Now we're way off
and it's
topic.
really important.
We're way off topic. Way off the issue of God. You're talking about
Interpretation of
interpretation
the
and the inability to even understand the Word of God. I'm trying to show you that you know what you're doing here in this issue. And I can teach Christians and other people what the Scriptures actually teach in some areas, and the other debatables. But we're talking about the issue of God. See, the Bible tells us that in Romans 1:18 through 31, it tells us that what you're doing is suppressing the knowledge of God in your unrighteousness. Now, I'm being accusatory. It's just I'm informing you. The Bible tells me this, and I believe the Word of God. But you cannot, we're back to the issue of morality, as an atheist, you cannot offer to me any objective moral, anything by which you can say something is right or is wrong.
What do you mean by objective? What do you mean by objective?
Outside of yourself.
What if a standard is agreed on? What if a standard is agreed upon by many people? Doesn't that standard exist outside of myself?
Then does it apply to all people?
Well, I mean, if you talk to a humanist and you ask them how they
does it apply to all people?
What do you mean by apply to all people? I mean, it's not.
I mean, does it apply to all people?
The answer is yes. If you mean it one way, in that you can develop a sort of an idea of what morality means and how to behave to achieve a desired result, then yes.
You work hard at this.
No, because you're a tricky sort of wordsmith guy.
No. You're working very hard at hiding from God.
I'm not. There's no God.
Yes,
I'm not hiding. Look,
there's no God?
No.
How do you know there's no God?
Once again, I said it's like Shiva. Yahweh to me is as likely as Shiva.
How do you know there is no God?
Based on the lack of evidence. It's not. Look,
based on the lack of evidence. What kind of evidence should we expect? We'll try this for another 5 minutes. What kind of evidence would you expect from a God to reveal himself to you? That under your criteria, that you want the infinite God of the universe to come and submit himself to you and your demands. What should that be?
Okay, look, let me answer this. I'm trying to answer you, but if I am the creator of a race of people and I'm going to put them on a new planet, I'm going to create a new race of people and I'm going to put them on Mars. But if they don't do what I want them to do, I'm going to torture them. Okay? If I'm going to be...
That's a misrepresentation of the Christian concept. You really should study what it is you're criticizing. Now, I asked you, what is it that would satisfy you for God? You didn't give me anything. I asked you this earlier. And even then, the stars line up in heaven, I am Yahweh. You wouldn't even believe that.
If you want to just say that God is a moral monster, then it's fine. If you want to say that God is good in any sense, then he needs to do something.
Wait. I asked you a question. You can't even answer the stinking question about yourself.
Okay.
And you want to come in and argue about God's existence?
No, it honestly doesn't matter. No, it honestly doesn't matter. Because the Bible even says that the way is wide that leads to destruction, and narrow is the path that leads to eternal life. Right?
Look,
and so,
dude, I asked you a specific question. You can't even answer a question that you yourself can only answer. What would be sufficient evidence? If you come in here and you argue God doesn't exist, you say you know God doesn't exist, but you don't even know what it would take to get you to believe. You see the problem there? You don't even know what would get you to believe. And yet you reject God because he doesn't meet what you don't even know he's supposed to meet.
Look, okay, let me try to give you, I'm trying to give you an example of why this is such a hard question to answer. Look, if I have written down on a piece of paper that says, John Smith lived 2,000 years ago, he did a bunch of miraculous stuff, he's the son of Shiva, and, if you believe all this stuff written on this piece of paper, then you're going to get a bunch of rewards after you die. Now, this is just written on a piece of paper. That's what I have, is a piece of paper that says John Smith, son of Shiva.
Oh, it is just a piece of paper.
Yeah, it is. So what I'm trying to say is that, Matt, what would it take to convince you that John Smith, who is the son of Shiva, who, if you believe what's written on the paper, then you get a bunch of rewards after you die? What would it take to convince you of that? Do you understand the problem?
I need to see some prophecies, because I need to see that there's something outside our time domain that has influence in the writings of the Scriptures. I'd like to see something miraculous. I'd like to see some authoritative claims. I want to see if the evidence recorded within it is consistent with the authoritative claims. And I could look at that, and I would judge through that and see. Okay, there you go. Quick answer. I answered you. You can't even answer the question I've asked you several times.
Okay, God appearing to me in a way that convinced me. If there was a God that exists, and actually not just to me, but to everyone. Because if he's going to torture them after they're dead...
Whoa. So now it has to be to everybody?
If he's going to torture them after they're dead, then they should be given a way to have that not happen.
They should?
Yes.
Who are you to say that what God ought to do?
Do you disagree with that statement, or you just...
Yes!
You don't think God should do that?
I don't tell God what he ought to do. You do. You play God. You stand in his position and you judge God. You're the one who says what God ought to and ought to not do. This is what God says in Romans 9:22 and 23. What if God, although willing to demonstrate his wrath and to make his power known, endured with much patience vessels of wrath prepared for destruction, and he did so, to make known the riches of his glory upon vessels of mercy, which he prepared beforehand? Now, you can not like that. You certainly have the right not to like it, but you can't refute it. You can't say it is morally wrong. You can't say it is morally right. All you can say is, from your narrow atheistic perspective, based on your personal preferences, you don't like it, and you think it might be wrong. That's the best you've got. That is it. God tells us he has the right to do with his creation as he wants. Who are you to argue back to him? Who are you to say, this is what God ought to do? Do you realize you're doing? Do you realize that what you are doing is saying, I know how God ought to be. I know how God, in all his wisdom, and all his justice, and all his love, I know how he ought to behave. You, an atheist, you who don't have any objective moral standard, you're telling us how God ought to be? Do you think God's going to reveal himself to you with that kind of attitude?
I've been on YouTube for 2 years, and I want to thank Benny for coming on. We're going to move on to the next person, but before we do, I just want to say, and Benny, you're free to come back next week or next time Matt's on. I've been on YouTube for 2 years, and Benny's been interacting with me since the beginning. He was one of the first people who responded to my videos, and it's interesting how somebody will spend so much time interacting with believers, trying to squelch out any sense of Christianity, any sense of who God is. Why do you think the non-believers spend so much time, Matt?
Because they hate God. You know, recently I was asked by an atheist, could God have made a world without suffering? Because they wanted to talk about this issue of suffering. And I wrote an article recently and posted it on CARM in response to that. I thought that was a good question.
Do you know where you heard that question?
One of the other places here on, I don't know if it was here or someplace else. No, I don't remember.
It was here. It was here.
It was here. Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, okay, good. I wrote a response, and the response is, well, yeah, God can make a world without suffering. He did. He did it in the Garden of Adam and Eve. There was no suffering there, and Adam and Eve were fine. God did make the world without suffering. There was no suffering. But notice what happened. Now, I want to define atheism first. Now, atheism is a lack of belief in God. Atheism is a denial. As Benny was saying, there is no God, which you really can't say logically and defend it. But a denial of God, a lack of affirmation, let's just say, I'll be nice. And when you behave out of a manner consistent. You behave consistently with what you believe. You don't behave according to what you don't believe. You behave according to what you do believe. So when an atheist objects to God, what he's doing is acting in a manner consistent with his belief that there is no God. Remember, you don't behave based on what you don't believe. You behave according to what you do believe, what you affirm. That's what motivates you. All right, now, so when an atheist acts, he's acting out of his belief that there is no God, and therefore his moral judgments will be based on an independence from God, because there is no God in the picture. So he's going to be saying what is right and what is wrong in his own eyes, apart from the idea that God exists. That's what he's going to be doing. Well, what is interesting in this world where Adam and Eve lived, where there was no suffering, it wasn't until they acted like atheists that suffering entered the world. It wasn't until they acted in a manner independent of God, not relying on what he said is right and wrong, and not relying, accepting his definitions of truth implied in his statements of moral absolutes. When they said, no, we will, they didn't say it this way, but essentially what they were doing is, what we will do is we will decide for ourselves what is right and ourselves what is wrong without God. That is one of the basic manifestations of atheistic ethics. I think it's interesting. Yes, God created a world without suffering. But when Adam and Eve behaved like atheists, suffering entered the world. I think it's really interesting and revealing.
That's a good point. Our next, I don't know what to call them because they're not calling in. Our next guest, I believe, is a non-believer, pretty sure. And their YouTube channel is. I'll just let you introduce yourself, sir. Let me turn your microphone up. There you go.
Okay. Do you hear
There
me?
you go. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. My name is Niklas, and my YouTube name is Evidence for You. I live in Sweden, so there might be some kind of language barrier here, but I try to do my best. Is it Matt Slick I'm talking to?
Yes.
Yeah. How are you doing? How do you do, sir?
Doing fine. How are you?
Yeah. Good. But I think Tim, if you allow me to call him that, it's easier to pronounce. Tim was right. I do not believe in God, and I have some questions about you regarding prayers, if you're up to it.
Sure.
Yeah. As I understand, most believe one of the best evidence for believing in a particular God is answered prayers. I've heard this from numerous sources. I think it's right. Can you agree with that, or?
Well, when someone says it's one of the best evidences for God's existence, answered prayer, I can't agree that is one of the best. It's too subjective a statement.
Yeah. Yeah, but it is a confirmation, though it might be confirmation biased, but it is a confirmation that if you ask for something and it happens, it's a confirmation that your God exists. So
I would say that it is an evidence, a form of evidence, but the evidence needs to be interpreted and examined.
Yeah. Okay, fair. But I understand that you believe in one God. Am I right?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. I don't know you at all, so I hope you give me
right. No problem, man.
Which God do you believe in?
The only true God.
Yes, I understand, but I don't have no idea which God you believe in. So
the one of Christianity.
Okay, Christianity, good. If Christians pray to the Christian God, of course, no use to pray to Zeus, right? And things come true, and that confirms their belief in God, and a Muslim prays to his God, and the things he prays for comes true. Which one I am supposed to trust?
The Christian God.
Okay, just like that.
Yes, just like that.
But okay,
which one are you supposed to? Which one ought you believe in? The true God, the Christian God.
Yeah. But there are many true gods.
There are?
Well, I don't believe in any.
I thought you were an atheist.
Yes, that's true. But if I were having this discussion with, let's say, another man who is a professed Muslim, he would say that Allah was the only one true God. So you have to. I
then
consider
he and I could debate it. And then I would tackle that and demonstrate that the God of Islam is internally incoherent and cannot be true because it's self-refuting.
Yeah, sure. And I guess that he would say the same thing. But
I would then say, wait. I would then say, show me how the Christian God is incoherent.
Mm-hmm.
But if he can assert it, but demonstrating it is different. I can demonstrate the Islamic God is incoherent because it's self-refuting. But they cannot do that with the Christian one. The God of Islam is arbitrary and self-refuting. The God of Islam says you must, for example, you must obey the law. You must obey the things that will please him in order to get you into heaven. And that is right for God to require obedience. But yet what he does is God is arbitrary, because even inside of Islam, if you do all the things that God wants, that Allah wants, there's no guarantee whatsoever that you'll get to paradise, because Allah is arbitrary and may just decide, go away, you're going to hell. This is what Islam teaches. This means that on one hand, Allah says one thing about salvation and then contradicts himself when he says you can meet those standards and then you're wrong, you're going to go to hell anyway.
Yeah.
He's arbitrary.
Sure. Yes. Fair enough.
That's one of the ways. There's other ways to demonstrate he's not true.
Yeah, sure. Fair enough. I haven't read the entire Quran. I have read the entire Bible in Swedish, of course, and a long time ago. I have not reached the peak of my argument rate. I just want to clarify one thing. You only believe in one God, right?
Yeah, the only true God. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So you don't believe in the other 10,000.
Right. What other 10,000? There aren't any other 10,000 gods.
Okay.
Why would you say there's other gods? I don't believe there's other gods.
No. But there are tens of thousands of the concepts of God. I guess.
Concepts. Yeah, there's concepts.
Yeah, sure.
So what? Concepts don't make it real.
Yeah. You just talked about Allah yourself, so I
yeah, the concept.
Yeah,
I was showing why their concept of God can't work. It's incoherent.
Okay, so you're an atheist towards 999.
No. If you want to define atheist as God. Are you defining atheism as an open denial of God, saying he does not exist?
Absolutely not.
Well, then why would you say I'm an atheist about Islam, since I said he does not exist? It cannot be.
Okay, so you're absolutely sure then?
Yeah, the God of Islam does not exist. It's a false God. Does not really exist. Okay, but if you say I'm an atheist regarding that God, well, wait a minute. If that's the kind of atheist that you're defining me as being, one who verbally and absolutely asserts that it doesn't exist, then that means that you are an atheist who verbally asserts that God himself, period, doesn't exist.
Well, there are, of course, different types of atheists, and you haven't asked me that question right. But you yourself say that you what? I'm sorry.
I'm using what you say, the way you use it. I told you that the God of Islam cannot exist. You said, oh, so now I'm an atheist to that God. Well, then what the definition is in that context is that I'm asserting he doesn't exist. So if that's the kind of atheist you are, you're asserting God doesn't exist.
Oh, okay.
If that's not the kind of atheist you are, then why would you apply that definition to me in regard to Islam?
That was not the line of talk we had. I asked you if you believed in any God, and you said no. And then I said, so you're an atheist towards 9,999, one of them. And then you said, no, there is only one God. I'm sure that Islam is false. And then it was not me that I said that atheism per definition means that there is no God, because it isn't, at least not for me. Okay, moving on. Great. So, can you give me? Have you prayed?
Yeah.
Yeah. Have any of your prayers come true?
Sometimes they are all answered. Every one of them.
Okay. I asked if any of them come true.
What do you mean come true?
Okay, come true. This might be my fault. This guy.
Okay, it's okay.
This might be a language barrier. Come true to me is that if let's say
some of the prayers I've asked have occurred in the way that I've asked. Yes.
Okay, so if you ask for X, then X comes.
Sometimes not.
Yeah, let's take just. Let's take a beer, for example. It's you ask for a beer, and you might get a beer right away. You might get a beer in a month, and you might get a beer in 10 years. Okay, that's what I mean when they come true. Okay, so some prayers come true. What kind of prayers? I have no idea what Christians ask for. What kind of prayers are you asking for?
Well, this is actually, you are an answer to prayer, believe it or not.
Okay, I'm reading by thumping Wingnut's comment here. I
You are
just
an answer to
made
prayer. You
just
are. You see, I prayed to ask God to use me to share the truth with people who don't know Him and don't believe Him, and they deny Him. And so that prayer is being answered, and you're one of the answers of the prayer. So here we are.
Yeah, great. Is it always that? Do you have more trivial prayers? Like I've heard. I've heard a lot of prayers come true. I've heard Veckel and Jim and others. I think it was. They ask for car keys to find their car keys, or if they're lost in the woods, they ask to find the way home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about it?
Yeah, I just most there are kind of horrific things going on in the world. I guess you're aware of them. Yeah.
Yeah.
The famine, starvation, war.
Yes, that's because of people acting independently of God, acting like atheists, because
I know.
God.
It's
they don't
Adam's
want to submit
fault.
to His will and His word, and so they act in a manner inconsistent with God's will, and that's why we have suffering in the world.
Yeah, I know. If only Adam hadn't eaten that apple, right? But it's kind of strange that some prayers are so trivial that they seems so, to me anyway, so petty to God. So I feel it would be very strange for Him to interact in that kind of way. And
okay, you feel that, all right?
Yeah.
What you're feeling.
Yeah, but I'm not finished. So okay, thank you. So and in the other hand, you have there are 16,000 children dying every day from starvation, and there are even more people dying every month of horrible diseases.
Yes, I understand.
Yeah, and so that's the reality of the world, and we can argue that, but most, I can almost say 99% of all those women, those mothers and fathers, of course, if they're not already dead, pray desperately for these fading away, hurt, sad, sorrow children, and they do it in the most religious, even Christian countries you can think of in the world. So it seems kind of strange to me that an wealthy American can sit in New York with a couple of 100,000 Swedish crowns. I don't know, 1 crown. I think $1 is 10 crowns in Sweden. Okay, so they are very wealthy, and it's all Merry Christmas and the turkey and everything, and they ask for a lost car key, and God gives it to them. And you have these illiterate tortured to death tens of thousands of children every day, and God doesn't answer them at all. It just.
Are you complaining about that?
I'm sorry, sir.
Are you complaining about that?
No.
Okay.
I ask you, how do you reconcile it?
What reconcile? Reconcile what? God answers prayers sometimes the way we want, and people suffer. There's no need to reconcile them.
I'm stunned. Are you making fun of me or something? Is it?
No, I want you to think. What you're trying to do, I think, what you're trying to do, is say that God, when He answers some prayers about a car key, and it's trivial, and yet people suffer, but He's not answering the prayers about their suffering. Why is that the case? From an atheistic perspective, what you're having to do is say that there must be a standard of righteousness, and that God, if he exists, ought to behave in a certain way. But as an atheist, you can't assume that as being true, because you don't believe God exists. You don't have any standard by which you can say this is how something ought to occur, a moral ought. You can't say that. All you're doing, and I'm not trying to be disrespectful to you, but all you're doing is you're saying that I believe, or excuse me, let me think about you. You're saying that you believe that God ought to answer prayers for keys and or also for children suffering. And he doesn't, so therefore you're not going to believe in him. You're not going to consider it to be an evidence for God's existence or an evidence that he is not there because he doesn't do what you think he ought to do. The question is, what makes you think that your definition of what God ought to do is really the right thing? This is a serious question. And I often get this with atheists, and I'll ask them this: why ought God behave in a manner that you think? And they don't realize that what they're doing is that they're stepping into the Christian perspective. And they're saying God ought to behave here this way, and then they step outside that perspective and say, but that's wrong. I think it's called the taxi cab fallacy. You get in, ride for a while, get out when you want, get back in when you want, and you play both sides. From an atheistic perspective, stay here. In an atheistic perspective, so what if people suffer in the world? So what? If you don't like it, okay, you don't like it, you don't have to like it, you could like it or not like it. But it's irrelevant. It's not right or wrong, it's just suffering. If you want to say God, the God of Scripture, he ought to not do this, then you better step inside the God of Scripture's realm in the Bible and see what God has to say about it, and argue from inside that perspective and find out if he's consistent within that perspective or not consistent within the perspective. But you can't impose your value, which has no objective basis, upon God and say this is how it's supposed to be. The only way you can do that is to assume universal truth or universal moral truth outside of yourself, which you can't do as an atheist. You're ultimately being inconsistent in your own worldview, and you don't realize that. I've discussed this with atheists so many times over the years, that trying to show them that they are being inconsistent in the way they think, but they can't get it. I believe they can't get it is two reasons. One, they're spiritually blind, 1 Corinthians 2:14, and two, their atheistic presuppositions limit their ability to go very far rationally and see their problems in their own worldview and to see their inconsistencies. So what I do sometimes, and you're great at English, I mean, you're awesome. But what I do often with atheists who do what you do is I'll just wait to see how far they'll go and see if they can see the problems in their own understanding. Sometimes I'll give them the answer, and sometimes I won't, because I want to see if they're going to do any thinking, any real thinking and philosophical thinking on this. They're raising philosophical issues, but they're not doing the homework that they need to do. Let me tell you something. A lot of times, the reason is I don't answer questions specifically and directly, and sometimes I do, with the atheist is because I'm doing research and I'm having the atheist help me do my research. I take notes on another screen over here. I have 4 monitors here running right now. I take notes about what atheists say and how they say it and what they do and their assumptions. You are helping me improve what it is I do, exposing the errors of atheism. Sometimes I'll just wait. Sometimes I'll just let you guys say what you want to say, because I want to see how far you're going to go and where you're going to go with what you do. But nevertheless, if you want to say that God should not torture babies, not torture, and you're saying that there is a moral ought, that God ought to answer to. But here's the question. Who are you as an atheist to say what ought to be done by God or by anybody? That's the question.
Is it my turn now?
Sure.
Yeah. There might be a language barrier here. I'm sorry, but I think you mistake me for some kind of fool. That was no. Oh yes, you did, and you talked for 10 minutes about things you think that I believe or I hold. That is not the case at all. I can tell you right off the bat, I'm very educated. So that was a nice spin, by the way. Great, but I don't fall for it. I asked you a question. How you can't? Are you saying that you answer my question with 20 others? I asked you, how do you reconcile a found car key to profess the existence of that God when tens of thousands of mothers crying over their dying and starving children are not being answered? I asked you that question, how you reconcile. You cannot turn that to, oh, the atheist cannot answer that either.
Are you saying it's a contradiction?
We're not talking about the
I'm
Bible,
asking what you
so
want. No. I'm asking what you are assuming so that I can respond to what you want. I already did respond, say there is no need. From what you've said and the way you've said it, there isn't a need. You see, reconcile what? Does God answer the prayers about car keys? Yes. Does he answer the prayers about tortured children? Yes. Do sometimes the answers get what people want? Yes. And sometimes not? Yes. What's the problem?
Well, he doesn't answer the prayers of the children. If they have malaria,
that means he doesn't exist?
No. When did I say that?
I'm just asking you. Is that what you're trying to get at?
No.
Then what are you trying to get at?
Okay. Again, the language barrier. It seems to me
no language barrier.
It seems to me kind of strange that you can talk to one person and then and you ask that person, why do you believe in, oh, God answers my prayers? Okay, give me one of your prayers. Oh, I asked to find my car keys and I found them. Obviously that could happen anyway, but let that slide. And then you have tens of thousands of parents crying and screaming out their pain and asking God to help them with starvation, and nothing happens. How do you reconcile that?
God doesn't answer the way they want. That's the answer.
Sorry. I'm so sorry if my English is that bad.
No, your English is fine. It's perfect. Don't worry about it. The question, you're doing it fine. I'm trying to tell you, there is no problem. God didn't answer them the way they wanted. What's the problem with that?
Well, I think that was quite amazing. I think from my perspective, unless the car keys belong to an HIV doctor who can save millions of lives, I guess the specific car key is less important than 25,000 children from my perspective.
You see, you're trying to make a point, an argument, but I'm just asking you, so God doesn't answer the prayers of these poor children who are suffering. He doesn't answer them the way they wanted them to be answered. So what's your point?
And I just told you.
Well, if you did, I missed it. Say it again. What is your point about that? Does that mean God doesn't exist?
No. No.
God's not fair? What? That prayers don't really count? What?
Well, I don't believe in him, so I can just speak hypothetically. But as I just said, unless the car keys belong to an HIV doctor who can save millions of lives, I guess the car key per se is less important than 25,000 tortured children to death. That's my perspective, and all you got to say to that is so what?
Well, you're not attaching it to anything. You're not drawing a conclusion. You're not making a statement about moral right or wrong and using this as support for anything.
Well, it's so you don't find that odd at all?
What? That God in His sovereignty will help me find my pair of car keys and won't sometimes answer the prayers of people who are suffering? And sometimes He does answer the prayers of those who are suffering?
No. And
I can't find my car keys? What's that prove? What's your point? What are you trying to say?
Well, to a lot of people, it's kind of strange, and I
Why is it strange? Sometimes I can't find my car keys. I ask God, where are they? I can't find them for 2 hours. Well, I guess it doesn't exist. What?
But Okay, I'm so sorry, but I really thought that I hope that the most people who listen to this consider 25,000 children to be more valuable than a car
Well,
key.
I would consider a mere set of car keys to not be as valuable as any individual.
Great.
But I can say that as a Christian. You can't, as an atheist, and defend it as being objectively true. I can say that car keys are not as good as valuable as a human being because humans are made in the image of God, Genesis 1:26. You're an atheist. People just evolved. So if they just happen to suffer and die, that's just your evolved preference. No, it's okay. It doesn't mean it's morally right or wrong.
I'm so glad that you value humans more than car keys. And again, nice spin. You told me things about me that you have absolutely no idea of knowing if they're true. That you can be an atheist and not believe in evolution. So that
believe
was
in evolution?
No, I accept the fact of evolution. So. Yeah,
all right, we're gonna move on because I don't want to tackle another when we have people waiting. So three evidence for you. Yeah, just say one more statement and then we're gonna move on.
It's not three evidence. It's evidence. It's in turned like yeah. So it's just evidence for you. And I thank you, Matthew, for the talk.
Thanks.
I'm sorry.
For coming on.
I'm sorry if the language was so bad. So.
No problem, man. You're great at English. Don't worry about it.
Okay. Thank you. Take care.
Take care. Bye
bye.
Bye. Matt, did you want to? I have a question, but it's somewhat related. I'm not going to put words in his mouth, but I'm just. In my opinion, it looked like he wanted you to defend the answered prayer argument, but not really. But let me ask you this question. What would you say about the answered prayer argument, about like using, hey, I know God exists, I know the Christian God exists because I have a prayer journal, and I can show you I prayed for this on this day, and I prayed for this on this day, and I can show you how he answered the prayers. How would you, what do you think of like people using that argument as a main?
That's the problem.
As a main apologetic, like this is. Say that again.
Well, I'm not gonna say they should or shouldn't. It's subjective. See, let me tell you, what the atheists are trying to do when they argue like this is argue from an issue of subjectivity within the Christians. They want the subjectivity of the Christians to implode on itself. That's what the whole thing is about. If it's subjective for you and subjective for them, then they're going to ask you, well, then how do you know your God is true? What they're trying to do is set an issue so that they can be justified in rejecting God. And the issue is in their subjectivity. They want to impose subjectivity upon the Christian because of his experience where he's had an answer, but a Muslim's had an experience of an answer, so how do you know which one's true? They're trying to try to set one subjective experience against another subjective experience. That's what they're trying to do.
So I know somebody who, with all sincerity, a brother in Christ, he uses this argument and he's just sold on it. He just won't let it go. He's like, this is the best apologetic. Well, what would you say to that guy?
Depends on what the issue is. There can be some things that are incredibly unusual that someone can say, hey, I was praying for this. I know a story, for example. My brother told me he was with a missionary, and this was an unusual circumstance. Now, you could say this is the thing about atheists. They won't accept things like this. But what happened was this man who's a Christian was home one day, and he had the incredible urge, and I forgot the exact color combination, but he had the incredible urge to go out on the side of a freeway with a Bible, dressed in blue shirt, yellow pants, and sneakers, and start preaching to the cars as they go by. And he thought, well, that's obviously crazy. I had some bad pizza last night or something. He had this urge to go do this, and he said, forget it. and so he dismissed it, but it wouldn't go away, and it persisted for weeks. Go out in the freeway and preach to the cars passing by with a big Bible, blue shirt, yellow pants, and white sneakers. Just go preach. And he said, I'm not going to do this. It's stupid. And went on and on for weeks till finally he realized he wasn't going to get any rest until he did it. What the hey? People just honk at him, throw something at him, maybe at the worst, who cares? He's out there doing it. He found a place, hopped a fence with the freeway, started preaching, feeling like a complete, total idiot. A guy pulls up in a car, locks the brakes up as he passes him. The guy gets out of the car and runs over to him and yells at him, how do I get saved? This man leads him to the Lord. Okay? Leads him to the Lord. So he gets in the car with the guy who's driving off, take him back to his place, whatever. Why did you stop the car? Why did you say that what you said about getting saved? The man said he was on his way to commit suicide. He said, God, if you're for real, when I turn the next bend around the corner, I want to see a man preaching on the side of the road with blue shirt, yellow pants, and white sneakers. And if he's there, I'll believe. And so that's what happened. All right. Is that proof? Coincidence? Cosmic consciousness of the Andromeda galaxy? What's an atheist going to say? Now, maybe to somebody that might be proof. Maybe someone that might be sufficient evidence. Maybe God might use that. But the atheists, what they're going to do, they're going to take videos like this, they're going to take things like this, and they're going to say, oh, the subjective this, the subjective that. It doesn't make any sense. I know what they're doing. And so when I use things with atheists, I try and stay away from the subjective. But what they want to do is to use the subjective, and I try to show them that they themselves are being subjective. They're being subjective in their personal opinions about what is morally right or wrong. And then they want to apply them as though they're absolutes. They're being subjective and inconsistent. And I'm just trying to show them that. And that's what I'm trying to do. That's why with these guys on morality, what I'll do is I'll wait. I'll see. I'm actually trying to find out if the atheists as a whole are learning anything, but I don't think so too much. That sounds insulting, condescending, but I've just not heard anything new from the atheists in years. And the same kind of things come forth. And I'll give the same kind of answers. Maybe some atheists are starting to see the problem in their subjectivity and their inconsistency. They want to step in the Christian worldview and assume certain moral values and then apply them against God, but that's self-refuting. They want their subjective personal opinions about what they feel is right or wrong to say, well, this is what is right and wrong, and God should act in a manner that they believe is right or wrong. They're saying, subjectively, God ought to do what I think he ought to do. And that's a walking inconsistency, and they can't see it. So when it comes to the issue of subjectivity and the answered prayer, you know what? If someone thinks that's the best thing to do, then do that. If they think that maybe God can use that, absolutely. Me, I don't tend to use those. But it doesn't mean that it's not the right thing to do sometime. I mean, I prayed that my son, who was going to be born with a birth defect, I prayed that God would heal him, excuse me, heal him in the womb of my wife, excuse me. And he chose not to, and our son literally died in our arms. Does that mean God doesn't exist? Of course not. But then, what about the prayer, Lord, give me a good woman who can put up with me, who's hot-looking, got a great shape, who would love me for what I am and be dedicated to you? Well, I'll tell you, the fact, I've often used this as a proof of God's existence. My wife loves me and married me. She's a hot woman, could have gotten anybody. There's proof. It's all subjective. So you see, they don't see their inconsistencies. I'm trying to show them, and I'm trying to see if I can find a better way to explain it to them, because this is not easy to do sometimes. Just admitting that, you know what, I'm not the best at this, but I see what their problems are, and learning how to articulate it with them, that's not always easy to do. But they help me practice it at least.
Yep. Hey, Jonathan Bradford is going to chime in here a little bit. I just wanted to let everybody know we're going to be doing this on most Sunday nights. Right now we've got about 45 live viewers, and it's first come, first serve. When I put the link out, you can jump in. Right now we've got 3 people inside the Hangout waiting to ask Matt a question, and usually we'll go about an hour and a half to 2 hours. And we appreciate you watching, whether you're a believer. I hope you find this encouraging. If you're a non-believer, I hope we can answer your questions and have you live on the broadcast from time to time. So, Jonathan?
Well, just to pick up one quick thing on what Matt just said, and the concept of subjectivity, and I totally agree with what he's saying. The atheists want to turn around, and they recognize that their worldview only has subjectivity. When you ask these questions about morality or even epistemology or metaphysics, that kind of thing, they have nothing but subjectivity. So they want to turn that around on Christianity and say, there's subjectivity on your side as well. I'll happily admit that certain aspects of Christianity do have subjectivity. We can go to where Paul talks about eating meat sacrificed to idols. You know what? For one person, it's totally fine. For another person, it can be sin. It's the exact same activity, but it's subjective based on that person's conscience. However, Christianity is built on a foundation of objectivity. So the Christian worldview, even though in some ways does have some aspects of subjectivity, there is a foundational objectivity that grounds it that the atheist worldview doesn't have, or a Hindu worldview doesn't have, or other worldviews. So that's why quite often they'll want to focus on those subjective aspects. And I agree with Matt that it's really, really a smokescreen to avoid these subjective problems with their own worldview, and at the same time avoid the objective foundation that Christianity has. One other thing that I wanted to mention, both Benny and I can't remember, was it Nicholas, the last guy? I just remember his screen name. But the concept of, there's no evidence or there's lack of evidence, or, what would it take? What kind of evidence would it take? I need to see God do this for me or that for me. Well, what they're saying is they want a certain worldview proved to them, but that certain worldview isn't actually Christianity, because the Christian worldview says that everything's evidence for God. God's existence is self-evident. Romans chapter 1, Psalm chapter 19. God's existence is clear and self-evident for everyone to see. So to say that God actually must provide more evidence for me is to say that I'm looking for something other than Christianity, because God has to do more than what God himself has said is good enough for me to know.
Amen. Amen. Excellent points.
Anyway, I'll let you continue. Just a couple of things that I noticed as a conversation was going on.
That's good. That's good. I appreciate you being here. Mike, Philosophical Vlogs, is here. You talked to him at least one other time on a hangout. We do have two other guests waiting, and I think we've got about 35 minutes. So, Mike, maybe about, well, we'll see how long it goes, but we want to keep in mind we got two other gentlemen waiting.
Cool. Well, let me just ask you a very easy question.
Okay. You're laughing.
Shouldn't take too long. I mean, this is not like a difficult problem or anything. The problem of identity and change.
Okay.
Like, specifically when it comes to a person or a human being. Like, what is a human being? Is there any? How can there be an identity throughout all the change of a human life? Like, what is a person? What are they?
Oh yeah, that's an easy one. That's a really easy one. Thanks, Mike. Perfect.
Well, I solved that yesterday. I've been working on it for 20 minutes. It wasn't hard. No, you kidding, man? I've been thinking about that actually for quite a while. And the way I illustrate the difficulty of the question is I say, well, what color is humanity? Is it blue? How much does humanity weigh? 3.5 ounces. Can you freeze it? Yeah, you can freeze it. Put it in a jar and put it in the fridge. It's an essence that we can only describe by attributes. And what is it? Like, I say to people, well, if you were to take a man and cut off his arms and legs and blind him, and he can't hear and he can't taste, is he still a human? Yes. Humanity is not defined by mere physicality. There's something other than that. Well, what is it? I don't know. I don't know what it is. I can only describe it by its attributes. We recognize it, hence the issue of Platonic forms, as some people like to go to. But That's a good question, and then the issue of continuity or identity consistency. Are you the same person you were yesterday? That's one of the major philosophical conundrums that's been debated for a long time. How do you know that you're the same person you were, 5 days ago? How do you prove it? Well, I still have the arm hit sore from my wife, so that's got to be, consistent proof. I don't know. Far greater philosophers than I ever even have read can't answer that one. I don't know. I mean, I'll leave it up to God. God says it, but He hasn't described what humanity is. We can only know it by its properties, I would say.
Okay. I think more specifically, I'm interested in like a particular. Well, I mean, I am interested in what is a human being, but like a person, an individual. Like we look at you as Matt and me as Mike, and we're different. Like even though we would say, oh, we're both human beings, we'd say, I'm a different human being than you are. I'm a different person. And so, how can we make sense out of there being this person that is throughout time and do you believe that a human being is a soul with a body? Is it both soul and body together? Like because obviously
it can exist independently of the body. 2 Corinthians 5:8.
And that soul, what is that?
I don't know. Don't know what a soul is. It's immaterial and has existence, just as a thought is immaterial and has existence. I don't know. I mean, it really is a seriously good question, and I don't know if it's answerable. I would think that because we get down to other philosophical issues, and we can do by analogy. You and I are making a chair, and because you're great at this and I'm great at that, we pool our talents. We have this great chair business. Well, what is a chair? Well, what's a chair?
We don't know what they are.
Yeah, we don't know what they are, but we have things that we call chair, and people buy them, and we call them chairs, and people recognize them as chairness. This is why Plato was getting into this, Platonic forms, but then that has certain assumptions I think are interesting, which I think necessitated God. But is it because we recognize patterns, and then we assign concepts to patterns we recognize, and then we assign truth values to patterns, and the brain is wired for pattern recognition? Or is it that we're made in the image of God, and we reflect certain aspects of His continuity and His transcendence as manifested in the universe? Is it a combination of both? And if so, 80% of one and 20 of another, or 70% of one and 70% of another? Who knows how these things can work like that? Those are good questions. That's where you and I could be, out in the back porch smoking a cigar, puffing arrogantly into the wind and saying, I don't know.
Yeah, Mike would enjoy that.
Yeah, dude. Totally.
Yeah, it'd be fun, man. So I don't know, man. Let's talk smack about somebody, That's what I think you would do when you smoke a cigar. I haven't done it like a year, but, you get with your buddy, smoke a cigar, arrogantly puff into the air, and talk smack about somebody else. It's fun.
That's what you do.
That's what you do. That's what they're for.
That's why they made them.
That's the essence of proper cigar smokingness. What is that? What is a cigar? What is this? I don't know. It's a humongous philosophical conundrum that I don't think we can answer. Good question, though.
Cool. All right.
Thanks, Mike.
Yep. Thank you.
Maybe we'll see you again.
By the way, are you an atheist, Mike?
Depends on what you mean by that.
Okay, that answers it. All right.
I think there's an eternal, immaterial, formless
abstraction
consciousness that we are.
You would. Well, then, doesn't that imply a universal being who's God?
Yeah, you can call him God.
Tell you what, since we got people waiting, why don't next week you call? Let's talk about this transcendent universalness.
It's hard to explain. I don't know if it can be.
Oh, I visit the transcendent at universalness all the time. So yeah, we can do it. It'll be done. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Peace.
Thanks, Mike. Next, it'll be interesting for me because I don't know who this individual is. If we interacted before, I don't know. I don't remember. You're going to have to introduce yourself. The name I see is JRC99US, and let me turn your volume up, sir. Welcome. Glad you're here, and you should be able to unmute yourself.
Can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Okay. I apologize if there's any background noise. I couldn't find my regular headset, so I'm on an open mic with my computer monitor here. So.
Sounds good.
All right, Mr. Slick, it's a pleasure to meet you. I hate to say it, but the first time I heard about you was, of course, the Daily Show interview.
Okay.
And
that's all right.
yeah.
They just, let me tell you, they lied a whole bunch.
I figured. I really figured.
Yeah.
My name is Josh, and I'm currently active duty in the U.S. Navy.
Oh, hey man, thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Seriously.
I also like to consider myself an aspiring apologist, actually.
Oh, okay.
My late father, who passed away in 2005, was a very well-known evangelist.
Who's that?
I'm sorry?
Who?
I don't know if you ever heard of Bob Kreider.
No, sorry.
No. Okay. Well, we were kind of known up and down the West Coast, which I can see it's daylight down there, but I expecting him to be super famous. But the reason I actually wanted to join the conversation tonight was to kind of confirm some arguments I've been having with atheists, especially on YouTube, and also some I actually meet personally. I think the biggest thing that I see that atheists tend to say, and I think evidence even pointed this out tonight, was the kind of the case for subjective morality. And most of the time when I deal with somebody, maybe here on YouTube or personal, they will say that, you know, objective morality is very dangerous. We shouldn't use it because it's very archaic, very ancient. And subjective, we can just use our own.
Wait. They say that it's dangerous to use objective morality?
Yes, believe it or not, I've heard that quite often is a dangerous thought.
So that's an objective moral statement they're making?
Exactly, and I do point that out to them. However, to kind of add to the argument without coming across as maybe arrogant or self-righteous, normally what I find subjective morality to be is in a nutshell, the right for me is right for me, and what's right for you is right for you. Would that be correct?
Well, then if what's right for me is that what's right for you is really wrong, then am I right?
Yes. I think that is kind of the conundrum here.
Well,
But a lot
they refute their statements very, easily. In some sense it's true, in some sense it's not, and they're not clear. And a lot of times what atheists do, sorry, just feeding off what you're saying, but a lot of times what the atheists do is not be very specific. One of the things I'm trying to do here tonight, and I do with atheists, I'm kind of in this kick for a few months now, is waiting to see if they can get articulate and if they can get specific. I try and feed them stuff to see if they're going to follow along, and I'm finding they're not doing it. And a theory I've got is being confirmed, but nevertheless, they need to be more specific in what they're saying. They often hide in ambiguity and then want you to be specific in their ambiguity so they can trap you. That's often what's the case. That's why they ask them to be more specific about what they're talking about, what they intend.
And I kind of figured that. But would it be more appropriate also to add to maybe the argument that if what's right for me is right for me and what's right for you is right for you, would it be fair to say to them, then who are you to tell me that, for example, Christianity is wrong? If we're to say that everything is right and nothing has a moral consequence, would that be kind of an appropriate counterpoint or counter-argument?
Again?
If I'm sorry if I'm cutting off, but
No, I'm listening.
okay, a lot of since the subjective morality does use kind of that standard of saying that morality is based on truth, whatever you find it to be is correct, or sometimes some people who say they are subjective moralists will say that, what's right for me is right for me, what's right for you is right for you. Could it be an appropriate counter argument to say something as, well, if that's the case, would that mean that it would be either hypocritical, or maybe could you give an objective standard to why to say that my faith in Christ is wrong?
Yeah, when they say what's right for you is not right for me and vice versa, and I say, okay, so I'm in your living room, I got a gun on you, I'm robbing you, and I believe it's right for me to do that. Is it right for me to do that? And if they say no, well, wait a minute, you can't say that from what you just said.
Mm-hmm.
But if you say yes, then it's right for me to rob you, and that's a problem. I like to get to the heart to show that these guys are being inconsistent. They're not thinking their issues through. Because they're saying what's right for you. There are senses when that's true. Blue is a better color than green, subjectively speaking. But it has no universal bearing, and no obligation and no moral ought is associated with it.
I see. And that's what I just wanted to kind of confirm on that. I joined the conversation kind of late. I also had another question. Another argument that atheists tend to use is and I heard you do use it earlier, that atheism equals a lack of a belief. Yeah. And normally when I try to show argumentation to it, or like maybe a definition through, like, say, just for a quick example, like dictionary.com, they'll give us the straight example of somebody saying that an atheist is somebody who declares or believes or says there is no God. And yet, one of the hardest things I've had is coming up with the Oxford Philosophical Dictionary that currently online says that, yes, somebody who doesn't believe or has a lack of belief in God. Would there be a better source for that type of information?
Well, atheism has not been defined as such, except by atheists lately. As far as sources go, just find old dictionaries and philosophical things, because these are authoritative in a sense. They represent the definitions that we use in America. I have the 1828 edition of Dictionary. I don't even think it has the word atheism in it, but I don't know if it does or doesn't. I find that this issue of lack of belief in God, in my opinion, what it is an intellectual, it's an attempt by atheists to retreat to an area that is non-assailable. Because how do you attack a lack of something? It's not there. There's a lack. It's just not there, so you can't attack what's not there. So they're hiding, in my opinion, in this philosophically very weak, I'll explain why, area, so they cannot be assailed. They're hiding from God, and they don't want any answers given to them.
I see.
Belief in God. I'll say, okay, well then, a rock is also an atheist by that definition. And they'll say, I say, my cat is an atheist. Well, no. It had to be a person who lacks belief in God. And I'll say, well, when people have concepts introduced to them, they generally do one of three things: affirm, deny, or reserve judgment. So if I tell you I'm thinking of a concept right now, but I'm not going to tell you what it is for a little bit, that's how you have lack of belief, because there is no of that concept, so you can't have an affirmation or denial of it. So if I were to tell you that there's an ice cream factory in the fourth largest moon of Jupiter, do you affirm or deny it? Well, hopefully they're going to deny it, but they might say, if they want to be smart, they'll say, well, I don't know if it's there or it is not there. I say, okay, great. Then you either affirm, you deny, or you say that I will make a judgment on that concept later on. You don't have enough information, so you won't affirm or deny. And that's what they want to do with the issue of atheism. So, then, okay, does a person, and you've heard me say this already tonight, I said it earlier, does a person behave according to what they believe, what they lack belief in? I know of nobody who behaves according to what they lack belief in. I lack belief in the validity of my car, so I'm going to get in and drive it. I lack belief in the object and the ability of that doctor, so I'm going to go to him. It just doesn't make any sense. So my proposal is that people behave based on what they affirm, what they believe. That's what motivates them. So when someone says to me that they lack belief in God, then I'll say, well, okay, The Bible says God exists, so therefore God exists. Just that fast. That's what I say to them. And they say, you can't say that. I say, why not? Well, because the Bible can't be used, blah, 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 and it doesn't prove anything. It's just a book, blah, blah, blah. Oh, so you believe that the Bible isn't good enough. You believe that it's not a good argument, right? You're not behaving out of what you lack belief. So if I were to say that God exists, but you lack belief, then you behave in a manner consistent with your denial of God, then you really believe he doesn't exist. And that's what I propose to them.
Okay, sounds good. Well, thank you very much. Those are just some questions. I just wanted to make sure to confirm that I wasn't leading anybody astray, or maybe if there was something that could be considered inappropriate, or maybe I shouldn't be saying, but...
Oh, no. Let me tell you something. Basically, every single time I witness to an unbeliever, without exception, I say, I could have done this better, I didn't do that right. I've been doing this a long time, thousands of hours of experience, and I actually am writing notes on another screen on, don't say it this way, do it this way, be better, you know, Man, I'll tell you, don't worry about it. Just do. Just give it a go, and let God clean up the mess that we're obviously going to leave. Don't let the worry of not doing it perfectly stop you. Just do it. I'm almost 58 years old, been doing this since 1980, and I still just reassess and go, I shouldn't have said it that way, should have done this better, I missed this point, I shouldn't have said that like that. All right? Just move forward.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Hey, Josh, thanks for coming on.
No problem. Thank you.
Jonathan Bradford, sir.
Can I just jump in one more thing on the concept of lack of belief? There's a bunch of different ways you can take it. One of the things that I personally, depending on the person that I'm talking to, I'm happy to let them give me their definition. Okay, you call yourself an atheist. Well, what does that actually mean to you? And then deal with what they say. Some will say, yeah, I agree with Matt. I think it's, for the most part, most people I deal with that will call themselves an atheist are using that as a shell to back into, so they don't have to actually put forth any positive claims or anything like that. And like you said, it's an unassailable position. The problem is there are fundamentally implicit positive claims with that. If someone says, I just lack belief in God, well, that tells me positive things that you do believe. I personally, as a Christian, believe in a universe that is self-evidently created by God. It is clear in every way that I can see that God created the universe. The Bible tells me that that's true, and everything I see affirms that to me. So that's the universe I believe in. If someone says, I lack belief in God, they're making a positive claim that the universe isn't obviously created. They believe in a universe that doesn't display the attributes the Bible says it does. So they're actually making a positive claim against Christianity. My response is, well, I don't believe such a universe exists. I've never seen such a universe. If you want to posit that it's even possible for a universe that doesn't look obviously created to exist, you're going to have to defend that claim. And they'll say, I didn't make that claim. Well, it's implicit in your claim that you just lack belief in God. So when someone says they lack belief in something, there are a whole bunch of implicit positive statements that they're making in that claim. So they don't really, they're trying to put up a wall and say, my position is unassailable, but it's really not. They're making dozens of different claims that are, once you learn how to draw them out, to be able to say, okay, well, you're standing on this position, you're making this positive claim implicitly. You're going to have to back that up because I don't believe that. Anyway, that's all I got to say about that.
Thanks. Let's see here. John, I won't use your last name because I'm not sure you want me to use it, but if you unmute yourself, I think you can unmute yourself. John is here. How are you, sir? You've waited quite a while.
Are you talking to me?
Yes. Yes.
Ah, so you can hear me. Good. Yeah, actually, I just kind of stumbled as by accident because I didn't realize that you guys were having questions. So, so anyway, Matt, I just wanted to say I listened to your radio station broadcast podcast while I'm at work, and so
Cool.
yeah, and I tell you, it is such a blessing, and it's just absolutely incredible what you do. And so I was listening to last week's where that one gentleman who was in prison called you. I tell you, and I gotta be honest with you, and to put it in context, here's a guy who's in prison for who knows what reason, and as he was sharing with you, his ministry and his life with you, I'm thinking the whole time, here's a guy who has it more together than I ever have. And, I mean, he just has so much clarity and so much love for God and all, and it just blew me away that this guy is being used by God, and he just. It just blew me away. It was one of those kind of conversations that he was having with you where it almost wanted to bring me down to my knees and thank God for who I am, because I'm nowhere in that same situation where he is, and so yeah, it was just an incredible conversation what you guys were talking about, and I really do hope to see you play a part in that ministry again, I guess, and I don't know.
You can go back to do, yeah. It's prison ministry is a humbling thing. You go in there and you walk in because you have your Master's of Divinity, and now they've requested you to go speak to them, these poor guys whose judgment isn't as good as yours, and then you walk out going, oh my goodness, these guys are humble. These guys serve God. These guys are in a place I wouldn't even dream of being, and being able to do what they can do the way they do in the study and the knowledge. Oh yeah, that was that was the first day I ever did it. And there's some great guys in there who the Lord has really blessed, and I'm blessed by them. I need to call them up, and I got a phone number from the guy, and I got to call up and see if I get him cleared to go in and preach and teach and stuff. But yeah, I'm glad it was a blessing because it was to me too.
I heard that episode as well. I mean, I can remember exactly where I was as I listened to it. Yeah, solid, reformed fella there, behind bars, man.
Yeah. Yeah, he said that when he first heard me, he didn't like me, which is often the case. Often people just don't like me, and they listen, they go, wait a minute, and then they start liking me and stuff. I think it's because on the radio, when you do what I do, I got to be a little bit difficult and annoying just to be entertaining enough to keep it interesting. So we'll see.
So I guess my question, though, is my situation is this: I'm a 43-year-old man. I've been a Christian for well over 25 years. But I am now feeling a push to get more into apologetics, to be able to learn it and to be able to teach it in my church.
Really?
What would you recommend as far as a person in my situation? I mean, where do I start?
Okay.
I mean, and plus also, I have no money. I'm broke.
Don't worry about it. Go to CARM, read up on the apologetics dialogues, read up on theology, read up on logical argumentation. That's what you got to do, and then you got to go out and you got to stretch your wings. You got to get out there and try, and you will become a good apologist that way. I'm actually thinking of developing a seminar where I can take it to different places in the country, maybe every 3 or 4 months, whatever, if people were interested, where I could go and teach them for, say, 3 days, 5 or 6 hours a day, teach them the basics. Beforehand, they would have a manual, and there's a short version of this. I'll teach them logic, teach them a little bit of philosophy, teach them a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and they'd have to have prepped before they got there They listen, we interact, they take a test. And the test is blind. I don't know who's who. You pass, you pass, you fail, you fail. If you pass, you get a little certificate. Doesn't mean a whole bunch, but you get a certificate saying you are officially recognized as being able and qualified to teach apologetics, CARM apologetics material at your church. So one of the things I've been thinking about doing, trying to find a way to expand this. In fact, I'm trying to work on a book called Strategies, on how to do apologetic strategies and approaches, how to find problems and issues and arguments and things like this. So what you're saying is, is close to my heart. This is one of the reasons I'm trying this, is I want to find ways to expand the reach and the touch, with radio and try to get more radio going. I want to get on TV, write more books, do this, do other things, expand, to teach people. What I need to do, I think, is develop a series of videos where I go through various issues on how to develop in order to become a better apologist, so you can defend the faith and answer the difficult questions generically. What do you think?
Thanks, Matt.
You wanna take another, or you want to end here?
Let's go. I'll take another one.
Okay.
I'll fudge a little bit. I'm supposed to do a movie with my wife and daughter tonight, so pretty soon. But
We're going to add prudent discourse to the conversation. Hopefully he's ready. Let me see. Can you unmute yourself there? Yep.
Oh,
Welcome. What's your first name? I don't remember.
my name is Ryan.
Hey Ryan. Glad you
Ryan.
glad you came in.
I guess I have one question for Matt, sort of regarding objective morality. Every time we sort of, we go back to objective morality, you seem to think that you make the point that, well, it has to appeal to some kind of higher power. Why exactly to you is that necessary? Because I think there are certain cases where, you can make cases that certain things might be objective, and it doesn't really seem like, you have to appeal always to the higher power. Because, I mean, if we say things like, well, why is rape and murder wrong? And I mean, if I had to answer that in the most objective way, it would be because a population could not support itself if those things were acceptable. I guess my main question goes back, if we talk in terms of objective morality, why is it always necessary to appeal to the higher power?
That's a very good question, and I actually wrote it down in my notes, and you've actually motivated me very quickly to write an article in response to that. I wouldn't use higher power, but I'll say God. Why is it necessary to appeal to God for objective morals? And I think what I want to do is offer some possibilities here, but I think I'm going to write an article on this, so I can think about it more clearly and put more cogent arguments and think about it for a few days, kind of a thing. So I appreciate that. So I'm assuming you're an atheist, right?
Essentially, yeah.
Okay. So, no, really, I think it's a good question. Every now and then an atheist will come along and just ask a really good question that really kind of just, just quantifies some of the issues in a good question. And you just did that. So, good job. And it's a really good question. I'm not exactly sure how to answer it the best way, but I do believe that basically we only have two options. We only have objective and subjective. We have objective, and when we look at you have the thing and then the negation of the thing. We have what is objective or it's not objective. If it's not objective, it's subjective. If it's a subjective thing that we're looking at, if we're looking at morals as an objective, as a subjective thing, then we can't have any absolutes in morality. We can have agreed on absolutes, but it doesn't make it agreed. It doesn't make it absolute. And the reason it doesn't is because if a society 200 years ago agrees that blacks need to be enslaved, and then 200 years later they say black did not, the objective standard changed in the sense that it's not located inside a subjective individual, but it's corporately arrived at. But the problem is that such society or majority-driven morals can often become refuting after a while, self-refuting, and that they contradict themselves after a while. And who's to say that in 200 years it might not be morally proper to enslave atheists because they're harmful to society? You never know. So when we have subjective morals, we really can't have any absolute standard by which things can work. Now, what you said was, well, you know, on the other hand, we don't want to get hit in the face, so we don't insult people. So we develop a morality of politeness, and so society works better when we do that. Well, you're right. It does work better, but that's not an issue of morality. It's an issue of function. It's an issue of getting along better. It's an issue of, well, it happens to work. And we kind of call that pragmatism or utilitarianism. If it works, then it's morally good? Well, no. If it works, it just means that it's working. It doesn't mean that it's a moral issue. So when we have the issue of morality, what I'm tending to think is that when we look at morals, you might have a moral view that's different than what I might have on a certain issue. Let's say that I think atheists are morally wrong, and you think atheists are morally right. I mean, that's not the best example, but we can work with that. Well, is one right and the other wrong? There is no objective standard by which, if there were no God, there could be no objective standard to appeal to say that this is absolutely true or absolutely false. And so, I'm not really getting what I want to get across. Sorry, it's not being as clear as I hope to be. It's just that when you have subjective things, there's no moral right to impose them on anybody else. If someone thinks that one moral action is wrong, what gives him or her the right to impose that value upon anybody else? Because it's subjective. The only way we can apply an objective, or excuse me, the only way I can see that we can apply any moral ought that should be applied to others is if there's an objective standard that's not dependent upon individuals and their subjective preferences, but upon something outside of themselves to which they would appeal. And we see this in logic, for example. Logic is not a formation merely of the human mind. Logic is based upon logical absolutes, which are invariant and essentially transcendent. We won't get into that stuff now. But if I were to make a statement that was illogical, you would not appeal to a subjective preference of logical ideas, and you think that I'm being illogical because you really don't agree with a logical statement. If I were to contradict myself, you would properly cite, maybe not by naming it the second law of classical logic, the law of non-contradiction, but you would say, well, you contradicted yourself. You're appealing to something outside of yourself and me in order to demonstrate that I am being wrong in my logical discourse. I think the same kind of a principle can be carried over to the idea of morality. If we have an objective standard, it has to be rooted in something other than ourselves. We can only, put it this way, I can only see that as being a possibility if there's a universal being who gives moral objective truths. I can't see that as being an actuality inside an atheistic worldview because it's subjected by necessity. Morals would be subjected by necessity, that is. And since they're subjected by necessity, I don't see any justification within an atheistic worldview by which they can say anybody else ought to do anything. They can say they think someone should. They think it's their opinion someone should. But what gives them the right to impose upon anybody else what ought to be done? In an objective worldview, in a worldview where we have objective morals, then we can appeal to those things outside of ourselves and say, this is what you ought to do, the same way we would appeal to the laws of logic and say, this is why you are logically wrong. And so if we're only going to have subjective morals, we can't ground them as being true. And anybody who would in any way say that something is true morally would have to appeal to something, it would seem, that's objective outside of themselves, and I can't see any other way of grounding that other than in the assumption that God exists. I know I went around a long way for that, but I hope that kind of helps. I'm going to polish that up.
I think I sort of got the main gist of what you were at least going for. I think the main reason, one of my issues, sort of, I guess I would say, with the response is when you say, well, you have to still make the appeal anyway, though, it still seems like you're putting appeal in a big hypothetical being, though. That's sort of where the problem kind of comes, at least for me.
Not sure what you mean by hypothetical, and hypothetically assuming God exists, and therefore objectivity makes more sense?
Essentially, yeah, I think that just about sums it.
Well, here's the thing about assumptions. We all have assumptions. You have assumptions. I have assumptions, and we validate them. Some we can, some we can't. I can't prove my mother gave birth to me. She's long since gone, but I believe it. But we all have our assumptions, and justifying them is the issue. Well, the thing is, that as I've been thinking about this very thing lately, atheism versus Christianity, for example. Come in. Hold on one sec. 5 minutes. Okay. All right. I got to go. We're going to do a movie in 5 minutes. Sorry about that.
No, that's good. That's fine. We're just about time to end anyway. You want to wrap it up? It's fine.
Can I finish my thought? Let's see.
No, we're done. Sorry. Just kidding. Go ahead, man.
Let's see. I gotta get back on track. Assumptions. Okay. If we were to do a thought experiment and say, well, what if God does exist? If God exists, then can we account for this, and this, and a whole series of things? Well, yes, we can. If we say, let's assume God does not exist, can we then account for the same set of things? And no, we can't. Well, if we can't, does that mean then that the no God position fails in its ability to provide explanatory power? And where the Christian one does. Now, it doesn't mean that it's automatically true, the other one isn't because of it. But there's just this consistency with actuality that we see, just as the theory of evolution has explanatory power and people believe in it because it does have the ability to explain certain things. Doesn't mean it's true, but doesn't mean it's not true. People believe in it. Well, why can't we take the same approach and say, well, let's assume God exists and then argue from that perspective? When we do, a great many things make sense. And we can get into this maybe next week, we can talk about it. But when I look at the same issues from an atheistic perspective, they don't make sense. Now, I think we could talk about that, but you see what I'm saying?
I guess.
Yeah, I got to apologize. I'm not articulating these things as well as I want to because, as I said, you asked a very good question, and I'm dead serious. Really good question. And you ever heard this saying? Sometimes you got to talk until you know what it is you need to say. It's kind of like that. It's like working through how to articulate these things. Because I think what you're asking is a very important question. And it really is, to me, it's tied into a lot of other issues. So it's a good question. It really is.
I just want to say one last thing before I head out, because I do have to head out in a minute. When you said, like, okay, well, yeah, I might be going towards a pragmatism position, which I think I do hold as far as I'm concerned, based on what I know so far. And I think the reason is, yeah, I mean, we do have to use kind of present terms to determine, like, what might be right, what might be wrong, and what works at the moment. And I think that is because we really don't have a good understanding of what to expect in the future. So, to at least have the best potential ideas, it's probably better to at least focus more on present ideas and see where you can work to build off from there. That's sort of why I would consider myself, at least for the most part, a pragmatist.
Well, we should talk about that because the problem with pragmatism is it transfers the goal, the objective deontological issue. In a sense, the ends justify the means. Not that simplistic, but that's the weakness in pragmatism, is that value is attained by the consequences. It's called consequential in other areas. And so the means to that ends then can be justified as being morally right. There's problems with that. That's way oversimplified, but that's something to talk about.
Well, you're going to write an article, you're going to go watch a movie, and I'm going to end this, and Lord willing, we'll be back next Sunday. Um, it is on a week-to-week basis, but Lord willing, next Sunday we'll be here as well. But for everybody who watched, thank you very much, and look forward to doing it some more in the future. Until
Yeah.
next time, take care.